Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. So hi again, everybody, and welcome back to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm happy to have another return visitor with us today, Leah Ziliak, who is in Bulgaria at a co-living community. So really looking forward to hearing about that. She's a consultant around the topic of co-living, hospitality, etc. So I always enjoy hearing what she's thinking about, what she's working on. So welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
So we'll put the last podcast up here.
Over there.
So it's hard to do when you're reversed up here. So you can click on that to hear her previous podcast with us. So remind us, give us a little background on where you're from, what drew you to co-living, and then we'll bring it up to present day.
Sounds great. Yes, my name is Leah Ziliak, and I am from the U.S. originally, small town in Indiana. And yeah, I worked in the music business for many years and then eventually got kind of tired of that. And then I got a job working on board cruise ships in the Caribbean. And I did that for a few years. And I just really loved, the community aspect of living on ships. It's a very international group of people. And when you're living and traveling with a group of people, it's just a really cool experience. And so when I started to travel by myself after ships, I kind of missed that community piece. And so I found that in co-living spaces in Europe. The first one I stayed was in Lisbon, and it was just such a great way to still travel solo, but be connected with the community, being able to hop into community whenever you'd like. And so, yeah, I started doing consulting work for co-living spaces. I've made the full leap into becoming a digital nomad and started my own business. And yeah, that's been 4 years since I've first started nomading and still traveling around. So, so
Where
far so
in
good.
Indiana were you from?
I'm from southern Indiana, right on the Kentucky border near Evansville.
Interesting. And I don't remember that came up before. I most recently was living in Louisville
Oh,
and
okay.
have a place in Corydon, Indiana,
Oh,
which is
nice.
not quite halfway to
Yep.
Evansville.
Very cool. Yeah, small world.
So first of all, let's talk about the sense of community on a cruise ship. That really interests me. And my sense, just from what I've heard from a few others that I've known that have done this, is it's grueling work and the
Mm,
hours are really tough.
yep.
So talk a little bit about what it's like to work on a cruise ship. Talk about some of the things that you have done, and probably you've done a wide spectrum of things, and what the camaraderie is like, and especially with an international group of people, and what that's like.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're working on board ships, typically you live on board for 6 months at a time, and then you have 3 months off. So whenever you're on board, you that's where you live, that's your home. So they're usually, I worked for Carnival, so it was one of the bigger cruise lines. So there were usually around 1,000 to 1,500 crew members on each ship, and then around 2,000 guests or so. So yeah, you're living and you're working with people from all over the world. I think, well, and on most ships, almost every single country in the world was represented, or many of them anyway. So it's cool because there's a whole life that goes beyond the guest experience. There's the crew life. There's a whole crew mess. There's crew gym. There's all these a whole little world underneath the rest of the guest experience. And so you find that when you're living with people, that in the same way that with co-living, you form these bonds really, really quickly, especially when you have common interests like travel, experiencing the world, usually social people, those sorts of things. So I worked in entertainment. So I hosted the shows and trivias and games and all those sorts of things, working directly with guests. So that was my job. It's probably one of the easier jobs on ships, to be honest. There are a lot more difficult positions on board.
Food service, especially
Yeah,
cleaning,
housekeeping,
housekeeping.
food, yep, all that. Yes, for sure. But yeah, you don't get a day off for 6 months. You're working 7 days a week, and the hours are pretty crazy. Sometimes you'd work at 6 in the morning, and you'd still be working at midnight or later. So yeah, it's they call it the boot camp of hospitality. I always hear that because it's just hospitality, but it is all in, because there isn't any off period. You always have to be on as far as being happy and being present and being able to engage with guests, because you live there. And so it's kind of a cross of worlds, and it's a cool experience, but it's definitely exhausting and something that that it's hard to do for very long. But yeah, the community experience on board was something really, really unique that I hadn't experienced before.
How many people would typically be on a ship doing the job function that you do? So that are you having to do, is there just one of you, or there just two of you, so that you've got everything from bingo to all the events?
Yeah, so for the entertainment hosts, there were usually about maybe 10 of us or so. But the job varies because yes, you could be, on stage and hosting the main stage events, but you could also be helping guests get on and off the ship. And all crew members are trained in a lot of really serious safety scenarios. So there's constantly boat drills and all these sorts of things that you need to know. So it was really great, not only from coming from an entertainment background to be able to be on stage and, engage with guests at a mass scale, but also all the hospitality pieces to it and all of the ins and outs of the things that need to go to create a solid customer experience. So that's kind of how I got into what I do now. It's very, very similar, but on a smaller scale.
The living quarters of I don't know if you're hearing that, but I'm getting a storm brewing over here. The living quarters of cruise ship guests can be really small and cramped. So
Yeah.
what's it like? And this reminds me of the TV show Below Deck, where they have very small charter boats and
Yeah.
show the lives of the crew. But what are the living quarters like? How closely are you packed in together?
Yeah, I mean, usually it depends on what rank you are, what position you have on board. Some people have their own rooms. If they're, one of the higher ups, they have their own space, their own apartment, basically like guest areas. But for someone in my position, it would be usually a shared room. So bunk beds and, a very, very small room, much smaller than the guest quarters. And then for other departments, it was, multiple people in a room in a very, very small room. So it all kind of depends. But yes, not the most spacious experience in the world.
And then a shared bath between the two of you.
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the communion of people? Was it, did people of the same ethnicity, especially if they shared a language that maybe was relatively unique, did people of the same ethnicity or language tend to stick together? How much cross fertilization was there?
Yeah, fertilization. There was.
I didn't mean that literally. Although I'm
um,
sure there's a lot of that going on too.
yeah. So it depends. I mean, everybody who works on board ships has to speak English at a another level because they're always engaging with guests. So everybody in that way. But a lot of the departments did come from specific countries usually, because it's easier for them to hire. If they're going to hire all the housekeeping staff from this country, all the security come from this country, it just makes it a little easier, I guess. I don't really know the reasons behind why they do that, but yes, so it tends to be that people in departments stick to their own department. With the entertainment staff, it usually tended to be native English speakers. So there were a lot of South Africans, Americans, people from the UK, Australia. So it seemed to be that main four group for the entertainment staff.
So now looking back on that experience, what are some of the similarities with co-living, and what do you bring from that experience? I know you probably didn't anticipate we'd talk so much about it, but it's a unique role. And what did you bring from that experience into your co-living consulting?
Yeah, it was kind of surprising because I loved everything about co-living, and I wasn't, I pieced together that actually I had all of this experience that was relevant, that kind of fit into what I wanted to do. And people always ask me, how did you become a co-living consultant? Well, I just decided I wanted to be one day, and kind of carved out a niche for myself, and have been doing it for several years now. But yeah, with entertainment, I worked in the music business for a long time, and I worked with booking musicians and touring musicians and events. So that kind of plays into a lot of the co-living event piece. And then on board ships, it was a lot of hospitality and engaging with guests and knowing how things worked from start to finish. We were the people who welcomed them onto the ship. We were the people that entertained them and the people that sent them on their way, and how that works. So with clients for co-living things, I focus specifically on the customer experience. So it's, onboarding to offboarding. We look at each piece of the customer journey and figuring out, for one, how they can create a positive experience all around, but also with co-living, it's about infusing community at each step of the journey. So it's slightly different than a regular hospitality experience, and that you're looking to build community more long-term throughout each piece. And there are ways that you can do that at each step of the journey. But and then from a crew perspective, that was its own community and its own life. We had our own crew events, and that sort of bonding experience that you get when you bring like-minded people together, because with guests it's very short term. They don't really bond all that much with each other, but with a crew, we're living with each other and we're working together for long periods of time. And there's something really unique that happens when you bring like-minded people together. There's this kind of feeling of, we're all in this together, and we're gonna do this and take care of each other, and have this kind of life together. And that's the same kind of thing that happens with co-living, a really great co-living experience. If you can facilitate those sort of bonds and those sort of community experiences, it's just a really unique thing. You get lifelong friends out of those sort of experiences.
In my early years, I worked a lot of restaurants, and then I also have done theater work. And I find the people are very similar. And actually, getting ready for a dinner, I work usually higher end restaurants. Getting ready for a dinner is very much like getting yourself geared up for a theater performance. But the people that are drawn to restaurant and to theater really are some of the most open-minded, accepting, embracing types of people. And I don't know exactly what it is about the work that draws that, but I do actually miss that. And I learned some of my greatest lessons in those experiences.
Yes, I worked in restaurants for many years as well too, and in theater also. So I totally get what you're talking about. The types of personalities that thrive in those sorts of environments are very similar. And that, with restaurants, you get joy out of, creating a really great experience, of making sure people are happy and reading the room and understanding the little pieces that go into creating a great experience. And also having those sort of connections where you can, if you have regulars, remembering their name, all these sorts of things that you do in hospitality. Especially in the US, when you're working for tips, you kind of have to bring it on, and show your best self, because that's how you make your money. But yes, with theater also, it's the same kind of thing. It's a show, and it's very similar to hospitality in that, you're sort of having to put on a show. But what I like about co-living that's different than hospitality is that it's much more authentic. It's a much more even ground in which people are really genuinely connecting with each other. And when you can create that space for people to connect in more meaningful ways and more than just, hey, you're a guest, you're my friend, and build this camaraderie, it's a much different experience. And that is something that is really missing, especially in the digital nomad space where I tend to spend a lot of time, is that it's really hard to make meaningful connections, especially when people are coming and going. But if you can create a really great co-living experience, it's very easy and it happens quickly and it happens naturally. And that's something that's really unique to co-living.
On the cruise ship, everything, all of their experiences are provided for them, or most. And one of the challenges that I see with co-living is getting buy-in, getting opt-in to helping to build community and to express that by bringing their best ideas, organizing events from the ground up. Yeah. Talk about some of your experiences there and whether or not you see that as a challenge generally for co-living, and some of the ways that you have seen that have been successful, or maybe that you have initiated, that get people to bring their interests, bring their passions, and to share with others, and to help provide those events so that the community manager doesn't have to push all this from the top down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that co-living spaces make in the beginning, is that you don't want to do your events in an event planning mode, which is the top-down mode that you would find on cruise ships and in hotels, where you plan an event and then people show up and then they go their separate ways. That's great if it's a short-term experience, but it's not great for community building long-term. So you want to create these community-led events from the ground up. And there are different ways that you can do that depending on how long people are staying and those sorts of things. I think here I'm not staying here, but I'm working at Coworking Bansko at the moment, which is a co-working community here in Bulgaria. And they do a really great job of getting people to do skill shares. For one, every week they have at least one or two people doing skill shares. And it takes a while to get to this point where people are, actively volunteering to lead some of these things. But in the beginning, you need to show what's possible and how that all works. In the beginning, sometimes it does require a bit of event planning, but you need to know your community for one, and facilitate some of these, responses. I know there's a space in Spain that I've stayed at before, and before anybody even arrives, they tell people, what do you want to teach and what do you want to learn? So people can come into the experience and know that there's something that they're going to be involved in this community. It's not just, an event planned for them, that they're going to be involved in building the community itself. And then they have a family meeting each week in which people literally sit down and all as a family talk about, what do you want to teach? What do you want to learn? They make a big list, and then people go through and decide how they want to plan the week's events based off of those sorts of things. So it's really interesting, especially in the nomad space. People are really into skill shares and sharing experiences and their knowledge, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs, so they're excited about these sorts of things. So it's a little bit easier in these types of spaces versus the long-term spaces, but it's all the same thing. You kind of have to show people what community looks like and then prompt them to engage. And if you show them that that's normal, that's what people do, it's a lot easier. And also providing a platform for people to communicate with each other is really important. So, putting people in a place where they can, have spontaneous events, have things that are coming together, because you remove that barrier between the community manager and the community in which the community is speaking to each other, and they can kind of do their own thing. So, and grow it from there.
And let's say somebody is interested in and does some animation. Mm-hmm. You get that skill and find that they can offer something there. Do you then poll the rest of the people in the community so that you don't have one person show up for an event about animation, which could put a damper on all of the other events? People would worry, oh, is anybody interested in this?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how big your community is in general, but I think a lot of spaces that have a larger community, it's as easy as just making, a Facebook event and seeing how many people are interested, how many people are engaged, and then promoting it, from the community manager point of view, encouraging people to attend these sorts of things, because you don't know what people are going to be interested in on the front end. Some people will ask when people arrive, like, what are some of your interests? What are things that, you're into? And then kind of pair people together and say, oh, I heard that you're into this, you should meet so-and-so. And that's where, knowing your community is really, really important also. So yeah, there are lots of different pieces to the puzzle, but yep.
So let's talk about the community that you're in,
Mm-hmm.
and give us a good snapshot of it. And how long have you been there, first of all?
Yeah, I have been here for a couple of months. I came here for Nomad Fest, which was early June, I guess, mid-June, and I spoke at the festival on co-living. So I've been here since then. But I also was here last summer as well. And Bansko is just a really strange place. It's a small mountain town in the middle of Bulgaria, and there's really no reason for people to come here other than the community that's here. And that's what's really interesting to me about it. I mean, it's beautiful. It's right in the mountains and there's tons to do and it's very inexpensive. So I see, the appeal that way, but it would not be the destination that it is if it weren't for this co-working community that has brought people here. So yeah, it's a really interesting place. I've spent, like I said, last summer, and then I'm here this summer as well. But yeah, there's co-working. There are 3 different co-working locations within Coworking Bansko, which is the main co-working space here. But every single day of the week, there's some sort of event happening. Usually it's similar, like on Thursdays, there's hot springs night and we all go to one of the hot springs nearby. Friday, we have a barbecue together, all in the garden here. Tonight I think Tuesdays are Skillshare nights. So yeah, there's a couple different Skillshares happening. But yeah, there's just events and community and solid internet, and that's kind of all you need.
Did you say that that there are 3 co-working spaces? Are they all in the same campus, 3 different spaces in the same location, or 3
Yes.
locations?
Yeah, so Coworking Bansko is a company in itself, and it has 3 different locations across the town. So you can choose whether you want to work on the one that's up north or here in the old town, and go from there. But there are a couple of other co-working spaces that have popped up in recent years, since Coworking Bansko has become such a big thing and is drawing in more people. So there are some more cropping up. It's kind of become its own digital nomad hub of some sort here in this town. So.
And is there co-living at each of those locations? You describe
Um,
the facilities for us.
yeah. So there are 2 different co-living companies, but they're not related to this one. This is strictly a co-working. They're working on building a co-living space soon. I'm not sure on the dates on that, but yeah, for this one, it's mostly just a co-working community. So everyone has their own separate apartments, but then meet, during the day to work together and then create all the weekly events.
Hmm. That's not a typical model, is it? It seems like most are co-living and have co-working spaces within the co-living community. Is that more typical?
Yes, usually for co-living, but yes, but co-working has been around for longer than co-living has, as far as a business model in modern day times. So yes, this one started out as strictly co-working, but it was, yeah, strong enough. It's the strongest co-working community that I've seen anywhere in the world as far as bringing people in and people staying. I mean, they have a piece of their onboarding email about buying property here. People come here for a week and then they end up staying forever, and they kind of use this as either a home base for their nomad adventures, or they just stay here full time. So it's really, really interesting that a community-driven thing like co-working and co-living can bring people to a place that they would never have thought of before, especially these more rural, remote areas. And it opens up opportunities for some of these places. I know a lot of areas of Italy and Spain, I think, have these villages that have been lost and are needing to be revitalized, and people are taking these opportunities and saying, hey, if we can create a remote village here of digital nomads to work, then why not? And you're seeing a lot more of these remote, rural, nomad communities popping up, especially in Europe.
How many people total would you say? It's probably hard to know because They are in 3 different spaces, but how many people total are in those co-working
In the
spaces?
community, yeah, I think there are maybe right now around 150 members of Coworking Bansko, but there are 2 other co-working spaces in town also, and some of them sort of cross with their events. But yeah,
And do people, is it a subscription model? And do people, uh, if you sign up for one of the 3, can you go to any of them and work?
no, I mean each of them are their own separate business. So with Coworking Bansko, they have 3 locations. So yes, you can hop across any of their locations in town. But yes, no, for the most part, yeah, you pay a monthly fee at any one of these spaces, and that's your spot.
Okay. But you can visit, just not interchangeably because of
Correct. I mean,
space and all
you
that.
can pay another membership fee at another
Okay.
space if you'd like. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Within Basco, is it Basco?
Bansko.
Besco. Um, and so talk about, there's some challenges, I think, in building the sense of community, even greater challenges within the co-working space because you're not living and breathing
Mhm.
around each other.
Yep.
Talk about those differences from what you've experienced.
Yeah, so with like I said, this is one of the stronger co-working communities that I've seen because it is difficult to create solid relationships with co-working because it's much easier when you're living with people and you're cooking together and you're doing all these sorts of things. So I think it takes a bigger effort to get people to connect in co-working, but it's definitely possible, especially when you have events and regular events that aren't so like they have a lot of weekly events, but they're not necessarily led. So some of it's just, hey, we're meeting here for dinner. Everybody meet here, and that's what it is. And everybody knows that every week we do this. You just need to check the location. So it's very much driven by the community. There's a lot of, there are different chats that you can join, especially across Bansko for activities. So there's always something going on. I checked Facebook this morning and it said, you have 16 events to attend today. And it was just like, it's so funny because you're in this, town in the middle of nowhere where you wouldn't, necessarily meet people, but it's just so easy here. You see people on the street that and it feels like a co-living experience because even though we're all doing our own things, you see the same people over and over again, and you form these connections through all of the events that they have. So
Are most of the events location specific? Are they mostly company-wide specific? What's the organizing model for most of the events?
yep. So there's a private Facebook group that the people who are current members are in, and so they do most of their organization through Facebook. They'll create events for the week, and then people can with all the information there. But yeah, usually the skill shares are in one of 3 locations here because they have 3 different options. So it's in one of those. I think on Monday they do board game night, so they meet the same place, same time every week, and they do that. The hot springs changes week to week, so people just need to pay attention to which one it is in. Barbecues are in the same place every week on Friday. Everyone just knows to bring things, and you contribute, and no one's in charge of the barbecue. It's just kind of like everyone knows that you have to help and that you have to cook, and then the people who've been around to show that to the new people who have come in that week, and then it just kind of keeps everything flowing. If you kind of show the new people what it's like and that you do have to participate, you do need to lead some of these things, then it just does a really great job of starting to build that community.
Isn't it interesting that potlucks dinners almost always work out? You
Yes.
rarely get only potato salad. Usually there are enough desserts, there's enough of all of it. And
Yeah.
I don't know how that works, but it almost always seems to.
Yes, magic, I think.
Um, so with co-working, there's probably more turnover than with co-living. Is that a good assumption, an accurate assumption? And do you know what the typical uh, churn is, average
Yeah.
stay?
I wouldn't say that is Totally accurate. It depends what kind of co-working you're talking about. Like for most co-working spaces, they're static and they're meant for people who live in a particular city and they're a member of a co-working space for maybe years and years. For the digital nomad space in which you're hopping into a co-working community, normally it would be usual to, just be in part of a co-working community as long as you stay, which maybe it's a few weeks, maybe it's a few days, maybe it's a few months. So yes, you're kind of hopping in and out. But here in Bansko, it's kind of a weird thing in which people get sucked in here and they stay for long periods of time. Usually, we always laugh whenever new people come in and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm leaving on Saturday," and we're like, "No, you're not," because they always stay longer, and it's a great landing base for a lot of people, and many people will just stay as long as their visa allows. It brings in a lot of Europeans, so they can stay forever if they'd like. So yeah, it's a really unique space. So I can't really say what's normal for co-working because it really depends on the space itself.
Do you know the average stay of people at this company?
Yeah, I'm really not sure. Yeah, I think people say that they're coming in with one experience and then end up staying differently. So it depends, but it's definitely a place that people come back to. I've seen that a lot because I was here last summer and I was here this summer. So the number of people who were also here last year is very, very high. So it's a lot of the same people coming back over and over again.
Do you think that and I know you can't know this for sure, but do you think it's a lot of them coming back like this is our summer camp, or how many of them are staying year round and they're still here from when you were there last year?
Yeah,
I'm not saying it
especially
very eloquently, but you know what I'm
I
saying.
know what you mean. Yeah, so it depends on the type of person in general because in Bansko it's a mountain town. So in the winter, people come here for skiing. There's a gondola here, so that you just go right. You have skiing and snowboarding right outside your door. So it's kind of for me. I don't like winter sports, so I'm just a summer Bansko person only. But for other people, yes, they stay here for the winter also. So there's kind of a winter season, there's a summer season, and then there are people who stay throughout the whole time. But
I could see in a remote mountain town in a relatively remote country that it would draw a different type of person and maybe more introverts, just because it's cloistered. There are not as many activities as if you're in a New York or LA. So it's going to be a more limited experience, but a closer experience. I don't know. Can you speak to that?
yeah, I think that especially some of these, well, co-working Bansko is relatively large, but some of the smaller co-living spaces tends to draw in people would assume it's extroverts who want to stay in co-living space, but a lot of time it's introverts who want more small groups, small experiences versus, if you go into a hostel or a bar or a big meetup event, it can be kind of hard to find your place. But if you're a little more reserved and you like meeting with 2 to 5 people and having dinner together, then it's a really great experience for introverts and people who want to have more small events. I know a lot of people who spend a lot of time here when we had Nomad Fest, which brought in several hundred other people into town that normally wouldn't be here. It was too much for a lot of us for people because it's hard when people are coming and going and there's a big group of people doing big mass events. It's a different type of experience. It kind of wears you out a little bit more than the more long-term experience of just having a few people at a barbecue or whatever it is. So
from our communication before this podcast, you talked about your focus being and main interest being on co-working, digital, and providing an optimum experience for digital nomads. So talk a little bit about your interest, what you're learning, what you're thinking, and
yeah.
just share that with us.
Yep. So, I mean, I work with all types of co-living spaces, not necessarily just the digital nomad ones, but those are the kind of the space that I'm most passionate about, I guess, because because I am one, and so I understand the needs and how unique of a niche it is, and it's very different than any other type of demographic. So yeah, the digital nomad space is just growing immensely, especially since the pandemic. You know, that people are working remotely and they have many more opportunities to travel and they want to experience life abroad, but they, want to do it with the community. And that's something that digital nomad co-living spaces offer really well, because you can stay usually for, a week, you can stay for a month, you can stay for a few months, and it offers a lot of flexibility, and the ability to meet people and create these genuine interactions that are really difficult to find elsewhere. So yeah, there are a lot of digital nomad spaces that are opening, especially in Europe. I don't see it in the US yet, which is very strange. But it's a huge trend here, and it continues to grow.
Mm-hmm. Had a thought, and I think I may have lost it. So the pandemic and digital nomads.
Yep.
Some of the co-living communities suffered in the immediate aftermath
Yep.
of the beginning of COVID, and then I think it stabilized. We're probably in for this new normal, and dealing with variants. How do you see the pandemic affected digital nomads? If you stayed cloistered, relatively speaking, then you were as safe as being in a nuclear family. But talk about the effects of COVID on the digital nomad space.
Yeah, I mean, for digital nomads, it was such an interesting time to be a nomad, because when you don't have a home and everyone's telling you to go home, like where do you go? And so you have to settle down somewhere. So I found that a lot of nomads moved more into slow travel if they weren't already doing it, staying as long as they can in a particular place. Usually visas for Americans and for most Europeans are 90 days in a country, so they will stay as long as they're allowed. So people are definitely stretching out their length of stay. They're not hopping around country to country like they were before. Nomads in particular, most of them didn't completely stop traveling during the pandemic. They're just very savvy travelers, so they know where they can go and what's open to them and what's safe and all those sorts of things. So they still traveled, but now we're seeing, now the rest of the world is ready to travel. We've kind of still been doing it, and it's been very, very quiet in a lot of these places where we usually had a ton of tourism did not. And so it's a much different experience now as people start to see that the world is open. But yeah, for digital nomads, it's been an interesting time. And I think now that there are more remote workers due to the pandemic, that more people are interested in this lifestyle and see what the opportunities that are available to them. So it's definitely increased the number of nomads or potential nomads in the world, which then increases the need for more co-living spaces, because a lot of the really great co-living spaces are being booked way, way far in advance because there's only a limited amount of space. And the nomads who've been going there for years are like, okay, now I know that I want to go to Morocco and spend the winter. Like I've done it before, I love it, so I'm going to book it now, and I'm going to book it for next year, and I'm going to have it all planned out. And people are more confident in planning ahead for some of these things. So yeah, there's definitely a need for more co-living spaces because the really great ones are getting booked up quickly.
Why do you think we're lagging here in the US with adopting co-living? Normally with technology, we may not build the iPhones, but the technology is starting here. And from the events at CoLive, I really do see us lagging here. Do you think it's our sense of independence and pulling yourself up, and that we're more culturally separate? Why do you think we're lagging?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because people ask me all the time, where should I go in the US as a nomad? Where should I, where are the best co-living spaces? And there really are none. I mean, every once in a while I'll come in up with a couple people who are attempting to do something, but you just don't, there's nothing like it is in the rest of the world. And I think in the US, co-living means something much different. Like it tends to be adopted by property developers who want to make a high rise in Chicago or Miami or whatever and call it co-living, in which they maybe do a few events. And I mean, and so I shouldn't say that they're all terrible because some of them really do, but it tends to be more major developers who are understanding that co-living is a better way to say, put a bunch of people in a space and charge more for it, and kind of missing a lot of the community piece that some of these smaller spaces have that are a little more genuine and authentic. So I don't know why there's not more of it on a smaller level. I think because a lot of Americans haven't experienced what that's like. Because it is very common, in South America and Asia and Europe, it's much more common. When I come back home to the U.S. and I say co-living, people just they don't even understand what I'm saying. You can say that in Europe, and for the most part, they have a general idea what you're talking about, even if they're not a nomad, even if they've not experienced it for themselves. So I don't know. I think because there's just more space. I don't know that there's just not much community living in our background as much as it is in other parts of the world. But yeah, I don't know. It's very confusing to me. It feels like there's a big need for it.
And affordability is as
Mm,
big of a problem here as elsewhere. It
yeah.
seems to be, and I haven't done a careful examination lately,
Mhm.
but it seems to be on both coasts where rents are really high. New York,
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, LA, maybe a little bit going on in Austin
Mhm.
and some of the other more progressive cities. But I don't know. We have this value of independence. Maybe it's partially because we're more capitalistic than European countries. So we're more about competition than cooperation. Um,
Mm,
but in what I see here is mostly these not high rise, mid rise apartment buildings, four stories, maybe four of them together in a quad, or
mhm,
and it seems really lonely because
mm.
my sense is that there may be a workout room, there may be a pool, maybe a small clubhouse, but
Yep.
very little interaction going on between people, and probably people not even knowing their neighbors, similar to suburban subdivisions,
Yep.
and everybody going inside and watching their own big screen TV. So
Yeah.
it feels very lonely from the outside.
For
I wouldn't
sure. And
experience it.
that's the same kind of experience that I feel when I see these spaces. It tends to be, luxury amenities and shiny fancy buildings and nice things, but this the authenticity is kind of missing in my view at a lot of these spaces that is just really key in other places of the world. I don't know if they just don't have that, haven't had that experience to understand what it's like. I think a lot of people in the US tend to think of shared living as still being, something for university students and for something that you grow out of when you're 22. You grow up and you buy a house and you get married and you have a kid, and it's still very, I don't know, it's much more traditional in the US than you would expect a country that's innovative to be. Whereas in other parts of the world, it's very common to go travel after college and take a gap year or two, and then go on a month-long vacation. That's another thing that comes up a lot when people are shocked to hear that Americans typically don't leave their house for longer than 7 days. With taking a vacation for longer than 7 days is pretty unusual for a lot of people. And it's just crazy because Europeans will go for a month or two and go, they've seen so much more of the world and experienced so many more things, because the US Americans tend to stay in their box, and they might, go to Italy for a week and come home, and that's their trip for the next 5 years. And so I think that makes a big difference as well, wanting to see more of the world, and the time it takes, because a lot of positions, a lot of jobs in the US don't allow for much vacation time, and it's just not the norm to do those sorts of things.
Mhm. Um, when the pandemic hit, co-working took as big a hit, if not bigger, than co-living. Um, it also was at about the same time that WeWork imploded here in the US,
Mhm.
um, of its own weight. But so And actually, co-living as well as co-working was not very intuitive during the pandemic. But I think it hit co-working more because there's more in and out than in co-living.
Hmm.
Now that things are settled down somewhat, and I know some co-working spaces here truly suffered, if not went out of business. Um, Now that we're in this newer phase, do you sense that there is some resistance? I think I'm still being fairly protective. So I would not, I would not go seek out a co-working space.
Hmm.
Um, what with this new normal, what do you think? What are the attitudes about co-working and safety?
Mm, yeah, I'm kind of in a weird bubble because I'm surrounded by nomads who are always traveling, and it's just such a huge important part of their life, community and travel, that they're kind of over the pandemic at this point, to be honest. A lot of people are just want to get back to their lives, and they want to, get out there and see the world. So I don't hear a lot of people worrying in that sort of sense. But yes, I can see where that would be a thing. I think co-living, it really did take a big hit in the pandemic, not the long-term spaces because people needed a place to live, and they were going to continue to live in those places. But the smaller ones that were meant for more shorter term stays for nomads, they really struggled because a lot of them, for one, a lot of countries shut down all hotels, and a lot of those spaces were classified as a hotel rather than a long-term living space. So they had to shut down altogether for many, many months. So that was a big struggle. But now I think most countries have realized that they can't shut down those sorts of things anymore and still survive for long periods of time. So I think people are less anxious about starting co-living spaces and are more interested in moving forward. But as far as the fear around staying in co-living, co-working spaces, I haven't noticed it much lately in the last 6 months for sure.
Any masking going on? Probably not.
No, 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 definitely not in Bulgaria. I don't think they did much except for at the very beginning. So no,
Okay.
no.
So what are some of your other uh, interests around digital nomads? Some of the other things that you're thinking about that we haven't talked about or that I didn't ask about.
I think we covered quite a bit, but yeah, it's really interesting to me to see the nomad hotspots that are popping up around the world, like the different cities in the world that people are gravitating toward, like this one in Bensko. A lot of nomads go to Tbilisi in Georgia, which is close to here. That's another big spot. I just spent the winter in Cape Town, which is another big hub. So these kind of up and coming cities that have so much to offer that, a lot of hasn't gotten a lot of regular tourism to come in just yet at the level that it will in the next 5 years or so. And I think it's just interesting that the places, I was just talking to this on another interview recently, but how nomads go to the up and coming spaces, and then 5 years later, then some of the more adventurous travelers come in, from the US or whatever, taking their trips, and then it becomes more regular tourists coming into these sorts of places. And it's just interesting. And then the nomads leave, and then they go find some other new cool city. We're seeing that happen a lot. Like in Lisbon was a big one 5 years ago, was where all the nomads are going, and they're still going, but now there's an overpopulation of all sorts of tourism, especially from people from the US who bought property, and it's an easy place to move in Europe. So it's just interesting to see the flow of a city and how that goes, especially having been a nomad for a few years now, to see how cities change and how that moves throughout the time. So
San Juan, I think, has been a draw for people,
mm-hmm.
and it was really suffering during the
Yeah.
pandemic. But nomads, so nomad, and I'm a digital nomad, but so we sort of lead the way into interesting corners of the world, and then others follow. I
That
wonder if
tends to
chambers
be.
of commerce are figuring that out and drawing
Yeah.
the nomads first as a as a gateway drug to getting
Absolutely. I mean,
the rest
especially in
of it.
Europe, you're seeing, well, in the Caribbean also, you're seeing these digital nomad visas that are going out, and they're making it very easy for nomads to come in, to, even have residency in some of these places, or at least get, a 1 year long visa, 2 year long, because they see the value in bringing nomads to the space. One, they contribute to the economy and that they make their money elsewhere, but they spend all their money there. So they're bringing in all these sorts of things, and it usually draws in more people, draws in more nomads, it draws in more tourism in the end. So yeah, a lot of countries are seeing the value that the nomad dollars and their time spent in the country can bring.
One last question. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, really up through the middle, where most people were working from home, I
Mhm.
think for people like us, we got really encouraged that employers were that the world was going to open up, and that employers finally saw the value of people working from home and efficiency and less water cooler talk and all that.
Yeah.
But I think the reality, at least in the medium-sized cities in the US, is
Mhm.
that most people are heading back to the office.
Yep.
Now in Manhattan and some other places, the census is still really low, but
Mhm.
the expectation seems to be at least, or at best, a hybrid situation where they've got to go in a couple of days a week. So that's not going to necessarily support the digital nomad movement. Whereas
Yep.
I think at first we thought, holy crap, everybody's going to be able to live
Mm.
anywhere and work anywhere. So
Yeah.
what are some of your observations about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing with this, with the, the great resignation, as they call it, it's people are seeing that they've seen the light, they've experienced what it is like to work at home, how much more productive they are, how much time they were wasting commuting, and how much more time they get to spend with their families. Not for everybody. Some people genuinely like being in the office, but for those who don't, they've experienced what that is like. And for those types of people, I think they will find new jobs, because if their employer is making them come in, then they'll find another option, and there are plenty of options out there. So I think the really forward-thinking companies, the smart companies, are able to steal really great talent from the more backward, slow thinkers out there in business, because it doesn't make sense to commute to work, to go to an office where you waste so much of your day and so much of your time. And yeah, I think people will experience have it, who have experienced it already, know that it's possible and can find other positions.
I lied that with that being my last question. Are we seeing are we seeing a broadening of the demographic of digital
Mhm.
nomads,
Yep.
and not just 20 somethings and 30 somethings? Is the age range broadening? Are there more people with maybe not families of five, but
Mhm.
with kids doing it?
Yep.
What are you seeing there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I say that nomads tend to be in their 30s and 40s. Usually, when you're in your 20s, you're still doing the backpack thing or hostel thing, and nomads are a little bit more of a mature demographic. So it tends to be 30s and 40s. But I mean, there are lots. Yes, the age range is just blowing up. It's just bigger and bigger. And especially during Nomad Fest, we had several families that came, and family nomads are becoming a much bigger trend also, because there are communities for families around the world, and it's a cool thing for people who have kids in tow and can kind of raise families together in this really unique communal way. And so yes, we're seeing a big rise in that, especially as nomads want to settle down more, or meet partners and have kids themselves. They don't want to stop the lifestyle. They still want to be out there doing their thing. And so yes, the demographic in general is definitely shifting, and older people and couples, and it's really, there's really no demographic it doesn't cover anymore. I mean, it's possible for everybody. So
Very good. Well, this has been really interesting, and I hope let's schedule a quarterly update, because you're moving around some, and you're exploring, and you're really thinking a lot about a lot of the same things that we're thinking about
mm,
and working on. So thank you for that. And let me direct you and our audience. We've got a plan that I forget exactly how we coined it. For a while, it was master plan, and it sounded too much like a Big Brother sort of thing. But we're envisioning the ideal co-living community from the ground up,
Mhm.
and we've outlined quite a few things in our plan, and it's on the front page of our homepage at thrivecolivingcommunities.org, talking about decision making and mediation and a lot of those soft skills that come with community. And now we've found a property in the Tampa Bay area that we have our eye on. Beautiful property, lake, a nice big party house that can be a community space for a while before we build a bigger one. And
Mhm.
we're working on the energy efficiency and self-sufficiency of the dwellings. So take a look at that, and
Yeah, yeah.
keep apprised of our growth. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You being here. Let's do meet regularly. And for our audience, please feel free to, well, let's give your best contact information. Can we do that?
Mhm. Yeah, yep. You can reach me at Leah at colivingconsultant.com or just colivingconsultant.com. You can find me on my website or Instagram.
And you've got a publication, Co-Living Compass.
Yeah, so I just started a new project called colivingcompass.com, and it highlights the best co-living spaces for digital nomads around the world. There really wasn't a great platform that I thought really dug into the best spaces out there. And so, yeah, if you're interested in staying at co-living spaces as a nomad or just want to try it out, you can go to colivingcompass.com and see all the great spaces available.
Great. I almost forgot. So apologies for that, but we got it in, and we'll put it in the show notes. And
Perfect.
um, there are plenty of ways that you can support the podcast and Thrive Co-Living Communities to our audience. So please look also down in the show notes. That's easy. This one is hard. And and you can find ways to support the podcast and our community. Well, thanks again, and I'll look forward to our chat next time.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.